Good afternoon, all. Welcome to June's Network Tech Talk. It's so great seeing everyone this afternoon. For those who have not attended in the past, Central Maine Tech Night is a monthly event where founders and leaders share advice on how they overcame challenges, capitalized on their target market, and developed their product, providing you with actionable insight for your own products and processes. For more information, you can find us on Facebook or on centralmaine.org under our Tech Night tab. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this afternoon's conversation. This free event is presented by Central Maine Growth Council and is sponsored by CGI, Thomas College's Harold Alfond Institute for Business Innovation, Valley Beverage, and Bricks Co-working and Innovation Space. In addition, I'd like to say hello to folks watching remotely at home or from their office. This Tech Talk is being streamed live and will be available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. This afternoon's June Tech Talk is MedRhythms, introducing digital therapeutics for walking with Owen McCarthy, president and co-founder of MedRhythms. In this network Tech Talk, Owen will discuss how MedRhythms is engaging the motor system through music and rhythm, allowing for improved motor functional movement and rehabilitation. For those not familiar with MedRhythms, MedRhythms is a Portland, Maine-based digital therapeutics company that uses sensors, music, and software to build evidence-based neurological interventions to measure and improve walking. And with that, I will hand it off to Owen McCarthy. Thank you for joining us, Owen.
Well, thank you, Sabrina, and thanks everyone for coming this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. It looks like we have a good mix of industry-related crowd and Maine-based crowd. So, I'm going to do a little bit to connect with all of you across that. Before I jump into the presentation, my name's Owen McCarthy, co-founder and president of MedRhythms. I have a biomedical engineering background from the University of Maine, and then an MBA from the Harvard Business School. I'm a couple-time entrepreneur. Prior to MedRhythms, I started a 3D printing of electronics company out of a lab at the Harvard Visa Institute. And then, in MedRhythms, we founded the company in 2015. And a little bit about the story. And I'm gonna give everyone a snapshot of the company in the beginning and sort of a summary of everything I'm about to go through. That way, if anyone has questions throughout my presentation, you're welcome to just jump in and toss them in the chat or engage, because I want this to be what you want to hear and interactive. And so, as I noted, the company started in 2015, where my co-founder, Brian Harris, was a clinician at Spaulding Rehab in Boston. And he was treating patients live, hands-on, using music-based interventions that had been standardized and studied to help people recover things like their walking. And when people would leave the hospital where he was at, they would ask really this question of, well, Brian, how do I get care when I leave the hospital? And at the time, there's only 2,000 people like him trained in the world. There was no one else in the greater Boston area. And if you were in a place like Patton, Maine, where I grew up, there was no chance you would get access to an intervention like this. And so we really started the company around how do we take the science of Brian and replicate and standardize that and reach more people. And so to do that, we built a digital therapeutics company. So digital therapeutics are evidence-based software that treat, manage, or prevent disease. So that go through regulated pathways often. So e.g. the FDA for approval, and can be prescribed by physicians, which is the approach that we're taking for our products. And so think of them almost like a drug, but it's software, or like a medical device that goes through the FDA. What we're doing is taking what Brian was doing in the hospital and have digitized it and improved upon that, where we use sensors to clip on the foot or other parts of the body, depending on the indication, measure walking in real time, feed it into a device where we analyze that and change it and deliver it back to someone through a set of headphones based on the neuroscience, which I'm going to cover in a minute, of how you can help someone improve. And we have a whole range of products underway in various stages of development. with the one that's furthest along in the chronic stroke walking population, and the others in Parkinson's disease, MS, et cetera. And so, we really think there's a big opportunity to take and reach people no matter where they are. And so with that overview, now anyone can ask questions about anything, but I'm going to start with my presentation here. So I'm going to actually start with, sort of a little intro of the neuroscience of, actually how do you use music, which we all know has some, for decades, for years, there's been this anecdotal knowledge that music can have an impact on people's lives and their emotions and other things. There's been some studied versions of that in different indications and populations. But then how do you really use that to target, recovery? And so, music has power. We all agree about that. Two of the principles that we're taking advantage of are what we call global activation. And what global activation means is if you hear music in your background, it actually lights up various regions of your brain, globally. So it lights up at a lot of them. And where most tasks and things that you do are if you were to look under some sort of imaging, very specific to certain regions of the brain. And so why this is important is because of that global activation. Is if there's damage to brain, right? Music is recruiting a bunch of different parts of the brain. If damage happens to the brain and you lose some sort of function, it's in a certain area, or there's a certain connection between two areas, and that's damaged. Now you have a mechanism to potentially reroute around the damage. And that's at the highest level, because if you were to talk to my neuroscience friends, they could dive into, the exact regions that does the exact things. And I can be dangerous there, but I'm not a neuroscientist. So, but that's sort of a high level of that. The second one is, as we know, the brain is not static, right? The brain can relearn things. And so because of that, you apply global activation plus the neuroplasticity, and you can get recovery. And so if you do things over and over again in a different way, and you facilitate them through music, then you can help the brain recover around those pathways. So that's very high level, and that actually in clinical practice has played out across improving language with people that maybe have a hard time finding words. There's what they call aphasia with someone with a stroke. You can use different clinical interventions to take advantage of that. In our case, we add in one more factor about what we know about music to then start to build the foundation for how we can then take this thing that is sort of well established and well known and turn it into something that's can help people recover. And that's what we call auditory motor entrainment. So if you hear a strong rhythm in your background, it activates your auditory system in your brain and your motor system in the brain subconscious. And that happens whether you're a healthy person, e.g. if you were to put a boombox in the park, which I don't know if boomboxes still exist, but if they did, if you put them in the park, which is behind me, at a certain rhythm, and people were walking by, assuming it's 90, 100 BPM where it's at, you'll start to see people sync to that rhythm as they walk by, because it's innate to the brain that auditory motor coupling happens when you hear that. And you actually have to come up with compensation strategies to overcome that strong signal. And so this auditory motor entrainment, can be harnessed in unhealthy brains and damaged brains, and ones that have lost, for people that have lost motor function, to help them improve, because this is a hardwired brain language. And because of the global activation and neuroplasticity principle, you can use it to help people improve their things like walking speed and symmetry and quality. And so, I'll tell you what that looks like in practice a little bit later, but you can then take that knowledge and build interventions that, work towards improving clinical goals, like walking speed and quality. So with that, And that's been put into an intervention called rhythmic auditory stimulation, which rhythmic auditory stimulation was what Brian was doing at the hospital at Spalding. And he was, actually, Brian, without the digital therapeutic, was actually algorithmic in his thinking in a way where he would look at someone's baseline walking gait parameters, would start a rhythm, which could be in a song or could be just, some sort of beat at the baseline, and then would adjust the tempo faster or slower, which subconsciously, because of auditory motor entrainment, has people synced to said tempo, and they would follow along without having to give them any sort of verbal instructions. And as a result of training there, and you start to see better biomechanical parameters as well, people get recovery, from that, and you can drive them towards functional goals, like improvement in velocity. And I'm going to try to share a video here of a patient that inspired this all, which we call George. George had 3 weeks of physical therapy up to this time. George had a stroke, and he added this, what you call asymmetry. So you see George taking short stride, long stride, short stride, long stride. And that's pretty typical of someone with a stroke. He's also using the cane for balance here, not so much for weakness. And so, this is sort of the baseline assessment. Brian went through this, and then what he would do, as I mentioned, he would start the resonance sort of frequency at the baseline tempo. So let me. So you see, George is stepping on beat. He's starting to make a little smoother motions right now. The cane right now actually is hurting his progress. So I think the next step, actually, Brian speeds him up a little more, and you see he's starting to take a little faster movements, smoother movements. Then cane is removed, and you actually look, George is starting to take more symmetrical steps, and making some improvements. And then Brian increases the tempo even more, and this is all within one session. And he's taking longer strides. He's sort of getting back his arm swing a little bit, because it's still working on the arm swing. And then this is now at the end of the session. And so you'll see quite a drastic, and then what's most important actually is that, like, you can't have a soundtrack of your life, or you can't have Brian following you around everywhere you walk. Like, you actually need, like, what they call carryover, which is the neuroplasticity comes into effect, where you can retrain the brain to have lasting effects. And so here you see at the end of the session, George, like, walking without the cane, taking like long steps. He's walking at double the speed right now that he was initially. And it's pretty remarkable. Now, if you're out there saying, well, what happened the next day? It's a process for recovery. So George sort of within session made that change. Will probably decline a little bit the next day, but will be higher than where he started the day before. And like over time, we'll change and we'll create a new functional plateau, for patients like himself. And it was the Georges of the world where we said, like, look, we can't have this just be at like high-end top hospitals. We need to reach places like rural Maine with this. And so, and like the Georges of the world are not rare. Actually, walking problems across diseases and indications are large. There's 3.5 million people in the US that are told at the end of their stroke recovery. So this is after they've recovered, they become chronic stroke, that they have plateaued with deficits that they're going to have to deal with the rest of their lives, which means that, like, they're at a high risk for falls, means that they may or may not be independent, means that they, if you walk too slow, you actually can't, if you're in the city, or you're at a stoplight, you can't cross the street without the little hand coming up in the middle of it, and so therefore you don't cross the street often. And so there's a huge need there. And then if you look at, I'm talking a lot about stroke because that's where we're focusing with our first product, but our pipeline has, there's walking problems in MS, where we have a trial with Cleveland Clinic and Hopkins ongoing. And almost counterintuitively, if you improve walking speed and quality, you lower fall risk by 10% for every 0.1 meter per second, which is pretty remarkable, because if anyone's seen the effects of a fall, like they could have like pretty large impacts on families and others. And so it's a big problem, and that's why we started the digital therapeutics company. And as I introed in the beginning, digital therapeutics to us it's this new class of products that really are only like 5 years old. There's a couple of companies out there that are out in front, like Pear and Achille and others, that have different types of products for different diseases that use software. They go through the FDA with label claims, e.g., if you're not healthcare folks, it's if you can make marketing, what you say about the product to treat a disease is a label claim, and you only can do that if the FDA reviews that, essentially, because you want to make sure that we're not selling snake oil or other things, which is why the FDA was created in the first place, is that industry. They get tested for safety. Like, if someone wants to use this product on their own, which is what our intent is for the product, that it's safe to use it, they can identify safety risks, and they're tested for clinical efficacy through randomized control trials. And so that's sort of the gold standard to say that product has outsized gains, over some sort of control, whether that be a placebo, like a sugar pill in drug land, or, standard of care, et cetera. And then from there, it's our intent that, you get third-party payers on board to pay for products, because if you think about anyone that that might have had a stroke, they're Medicare age, maybe lower socioeconomic status. There's a lot of burden on them for pricing, and insurance is there to enable them to live their healthy best lives. And so you want to make sure that is available to them through that pathway. And these products have seen great progress throughout the pandemic, which has been a terrible 18 months, but has shown that the digital delivery of healthcare in various ways, from telemedicine visits to digitally delivered therapies, can make a huge difference and be a great tool that we all can use in the healthcare system. And so, from there, it's our vision that we can be a category defining company in neurology. And for the Maine folks there, we're based in Portland, Maine. We intend to build out, a large group of our team here with some remote workers. And we think we can do it from here. As I said, we subscribe to this evidence-based, FDA regulated approach. One of the distinguishers about our products versus some of the other digital therapeutics is that we are directly targeting the direct stimulation, the brain, versus some of the behavior change techniques, which are great and they work really well. It's just something we talk about how we may be different. And then, getting to the, okay, you probably listened to all this and said, well, I saw Brian with a guitar and I saw some neuroscience and I see the unmet need, but like, well, how do you actually take it and build a product and reach people? And so at the core of everything we do is we've created what we call clinical thinking algorithms. And so these clinical thinking algorithms take inputs on walking, both quality in real time and how synced they are to the music in real time. In up to the second, we're analyzing those things, much like a clinician may look at someone's walking. We actually use music with the rhythm in it. So the music sort of is the the carrier for what we call the active ingredient, the rhythm, that is then delivered to a patient through a set of headphones and puts them on a regimen that was trained by Brian, actually, to think like him, to take into account, like, what's the clinical goal? Do we want to speed up their cadence? Do we want to slow down their cadence? Do we need to increase their stride length? And then takes into account, what change, if a change happens in the environment, e.g. like their walking quality, do we do something different about, do we add cues and accents? Do we slow it down? So there's 45 different responses in 100+ different states of said algorithm that happen. That's how that works from that. And that now has been, do you have a question, Garvin?
I didn't want to break your
yeah, no,
there,
it looks, I see you like ready for questions. So, and I welcome questions throughout. So,
well, just again, so far, so incredible. And thank you for all this. Just curious, obviously, no patient is the same. How much tweaking per patient occurs? And is there like a sweet spot, or, I grew up playing piano. This really resonates with me. Is there anything like that in terms of just the fluidity from patient to patient?
yeah, so a couple of questions there. All of the interventions are built to be individualized, challenging, and progressive. And what I mean by that is the algorithm logic may be the same, right? Like, so when it sees something, it does something else, but we measure, say, so a session might be, we measure where they're at on that day for a period of time, the baseline. We start the intervention where they're at, and then we work them towards a clinical goal. And no two sessions are the same, and no two patients are the same because of how they perform, within said session. And so that is, in a sense, individualized and personalized, though, I wouldn't say it's AI, there's like a whole nother level of, does it get better over time? Does it know the patient? For the approach we're taking, which it is pre-market, right? So we have to go through the FDA, and we're in the middle of our pivotal trial, which I'll cover in a minute. We have to make sure there's certain logic about the algorithm that's been tested to say that this algorithm could have efficacy there. So that's one part of your question. The other part of your question is sort of like, what's the music experience like, I think? We actually have a system that we take in any piece of music content, we screen it for what we call, and we actually have a patent on this, but we screen it for what we call therapeutic value. So we assess, like, what's the rhythmic structure, the time signature, what's a bunch of these parameters, and then sort of green light, red light it to be able to be included into said product. And then from there, we can augment that or speed it up, slow it down in real time, and allow the users to choose their types of music. From a more macro perspective, people have 2 feet and they walk in 4/4. If you're a musician, 4/4 and 2/4 time. In that setting, right? Like, it's really hard to use some jazz and classical music because of like how it's composed. And so, but most other types of music are able to be used, and it's up to preference. Now, if you would ask me, like, Owen, like, music seems like it's complicated, and like, do you have the legal rights to do that, right, with some of the music? Check back in a few weeks, and we should have some news on that front. So
Thank you for that. Great answers. And I would love to see your Spotify playlists. I bet they're all over the place.
They are all over the place. Is there another question out there? I see another box pop up.
I had a quick follow-up question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. I had a quick follow-up question I was curious about. Do you, since it's patented, I'm sure you're safe to talk about it, or do you have like a link to it? Because I was curious on like what other parameters the algorithm checks for. Because like I've listened to like how Spotify does their recognition, and it's super cool. So I was just wondering if you had any more information on that, like what it looks for.
Other parameters on the screening of the music?
Yeah. I just think that stuff is kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's a good question, Sean. I think we look at a lot of parameters. Some of them are more for like future R&D almost in a sense,
Fair enough.
because
Yeah,
like
yeah,
we literally have 40 data points for every step. And then if we know everything that's happened in the song, right, at that, and it's time synced and it's all saved together and we know the outcomes, right? Like longer term, that like we will learn way more about what makes an impact on recovery and can improve delivery of interventions at a large scale. So like we pull everything out from like some danceability and harmony, like all these things, right? Like that we pull out. And then specifically other things we might look at are like beat strength, beat salience, consistency. I mean, there's a whole range of them. And, you know, we sort of have this like internal score that gets composited and says like good or not, or augmentation that we could add. But happy to talk offline about that all day. We spent,
no,
I see you have a guitar in the background.
I do.
So
I like to play music.
that's good. Are you a software engineer yourself? Or are you
I'm actually just a student at UT interested in this stuff, so I like
very,
music and engineering, so it's a cool combo.
very cool. We'll reach out. Happy to talk with you into the future about any of this. So yeah, and so you know, next set of slides are sort of you know, we've got a this is for our stroke product. This is, you know, early some early renderings, but the stroke product to be sent to used in home is actually a kit of things. The kit of things includes a lockdown device, a set of sensors, and headphones. It's made to, like, if you think about one of a large challenge, like we know one of the things we're solving for is like clinical efficacy and scaling that, but also like, can we get people to use the product in the real world? And one of the things that we found in our user research was setting up Bluetooth sensors was really hard for this population. They often have the use of one hand. Like if you were to ship them some sensors and say download an app, like that failed like 95% of the time. And so we have kits of products that are getting sent out, you know, and made super easy. And we right now are testing and improving this sort of early design, which is not going to fully look like this, but it gives you sort of a tangible feel of what the product will look like, or could look like, with users under what we call Product Lab, which is a clinical study for usability that is ongoing and iterative, and that we're learning a bunch about how to make it so people can use the product in the real world, and then how to drive engagement such that they will continue to use it in the real world. And we have a really great product and engineering team that they're working through a number of those questions. You know, as I mentioned, this is not the final look, but you might think that like design is pretty basic, but it's really the app screens like for the product are meant to be just as a way to get into your session, which is all auditory in nature. And we'll want to make it as much as a start button as possible, and then enhance that over time such that we don't lose people to usability issues. And so, you know, we've gotten really good feedback on this. There's some things we know we already need to change, but you know, I think we're getting like a 90% at this point in the process. People can set up and use the product without any support calls or anything else, which is pretty high given, you know, it's a lot to ask of a stroke survivor. So, you know, products perform well in clinical study. I think I'll just note that on the right is an interim analysis of our pivotal study, which we submitted to get breakthrough designation, and are seeing really good results. And then on the left is a novel endpoint that we actually looked at in a small feasibility study that showed an improvement in walking economy for people that had used the product versus not. Happy to get into more of the details of that offline if someone wants to reach out. And then for our pipeline, you know, I talked a lot about stroke, which is where 80% of the focus is for the organization at this point. But we have had advancements across a range of indications and conditions, you know, with the algorithms are actually different per disease state. They're set up differently, they're tuned differently, they're in different there's different clinical goals and things, but we've had great clinical collaborators to start what we call feasibility, which is evaluating the magnitude of the impact expected to then consider moving it on to pivotal. With chronic stroke, we're in the pivotal study stage, which is the last step, assuming success before going to the FDA with a submission. And with chronic stroke, we just announced that we have a commercial partner that's a close to $1 billion company called Eversana that is going to be our arm that helps us bring the product to the 3.5 million chronic stroke survivors. And as I mentioned here, we have this healthy pipeline of clinical trials, all actually pretty much all investigator initiated, in the sense that people found out about us and wanted to study the product across many of these areas. We're very excited about the progress in multiple sclerosis. Cleveland Clinic has an ongoing study. We just started a imaging study with MGH, which for the non scientists out there, we're really looking at, in MS is a bit of a different reason why the mechanism of action works than stroke and PD. It's been shown that it could work in MS, but there's a lack of maybe the why a little more than some of the other indications. And so doing imaging of the brain, like pre and post intervention, may help us understand more of what's going on. And that's a big study. And fortunately, I believe the National MS Society is funding that for MGH. So we didn't have to fund the trial, which is helpful for a small company. And then, we just started off a feasibility study in Parkinson's disease, which has the second most research in the intervention. And then UMass Memorial is doing a study in acute post-acute stroke, or, when I say acute versus chronic stroke, that's earlier in the journey, versus chronic is when they're told they're never going to get better again, sort of at the stability point or the plateau of rehabilitation. So covered a lot of ground. It's been 38 minutes. Happy to answer any questions either via the chat or via when I see your face pop up on the screen here.
Thank you so much, Owen, for that incredible presentation. I think we all, can really see the benefits of this life-changing technology for those who, have realized, interventive needs themselves, or they know individuals who need them. I'm curious, with your multitude of partnerships with hospitals and rehabilitation centers all over the country, and even with Bose Corporation, which is really impressive.
Yeah.
Where do you see MedRhythms, as a digital health expert for the World Health Organization? Where do you see this technology going, international, domestic? What are your hopes for the future?
Yeah, so we built a company to sort of, like, as I said, we want to be a transformative company in neurology, right? We've started with walking. We have a big set of markets here, and we started with chronic stroke. And so first and foremost, we need to execute on that to realize all of the dreams, right, of everything else. But imagine that we do, I would say that, like, all of these other conditions we'd want to be in, starting in the US, but also, Europe. The neuroscience crosses boundaries, and there's many patients that could benefit from this in other areas. And we've kept in touch with, as you said, through the World Health Organization and the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, with what's going on in Europe, what's going on in Japan, what's going on in Asia Pacific. And there's a lot of really interesting opportunities to bring that technology there. And we fully intend to do that. But, it's interesting, like, our vision gets larger every day. Like, maybe we can expand from walking, maybe we can do other things in neuro that isn't walking. Maybe we can add in other conditions based on some of this, data on improving endurance. But at the end of the day, as vision gets bigger, like the ability, like, we need to execute even smaller, in a sense, to, like, build that foundation such that we can then build an organization that can stand alone and, reach the millions of people with neurologic injury disease across the world. And so vision's bigger, focusing and like and executing maybe narrower to get to that vision every day. So that's a lot of my job is like talking about vision and then like worrying about like working with the team to worry about some of the small details to, and so that's a hard switch for context sometimes, but we're committed to do it. And as I said, we're committed to be here in Maine to do it from here. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Very cool.
Owen, thank you again. Remarkable presentation and a really impressive lineup of institutional collaborators from Cleveland Clinic and beyond. Just so cool to see. So congratulations again. Can you just touch on briefly, what does market competition look like in this space for you?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. Like if you look at like digital therapeutics overall, it's about a 5 to 7 year old industry. And so there is, a lot of the companies are building sort of the playbook now and building a market. And so when you're building a market, there's a lot more collaboration that happens because if you're, you need to create like, this is a bad analogy, but I'm just picturing in my mind, like fighting over like a little hill versus like fighting over a mountain range. Like we need to like build this mountain range first. Not that I have any authority to build a mountain range, but if I did, like collaboratively as an industry, we need to build the mountain range. And then someday we can fight over the mountains because right now it's a small hill as an industry. And so, I think it's very collaborative. I mean, there's some, potential competitors out there. I would say, in our space, there's, we're one of the ones out in front. But, as you sort of, as you build that mountain range, people see it and they come and they will show up. And so, we're very thoughtful about that. But at this point, we, even you might know from this presentation, we're more open and collaborative than than industries might be as they mature.
Is this a space that like Medtronic has jumped into, for example, and like some of the institutional medical device providers, et cetera?
Well, so it's really interesting because it's a good question, though. There's large companies that are in the space. It's not from where you would think initially where they're coming from because the products are largely like, if you go the prescription route, they're largely prescribed and used in home and like treat a disease. And if you would describe something that's prescribed, used in home that treats a disease, you actually would think, oh, it's a pharmaceutical or a life science product, because that's sort of how it happens. Because most of the Medtronics like implant things in hospitals, right? Like doctor gets something, they put it into your knee, they screw it up and your knee's better or whatever. Like, and so that business model commercially is slightly separate. So what we've seen is, Novartis, Astellas, Orexo, Boehringer, et cetera, on the pharmaceutical side have gotten into the digital therapeutic space. The ones on the medical device side are like the Philips are thinking about it heavily because they have a lot of like Lifeline and home health already, and maybe the people that do diabetes, right? Diabetes is a bit of a outside because it's like a lot of devices in home. And so a lot of big players are coming in rapidly, but it's started with the pharmaceutical because of the overlap with the business model and how that could look.
Great, thank you. I'll jump in again. And at your discretion and where you feel comfortable touching on this, Owen, can you maybe give a thumbnail sketch on any seed rounds, fundraising, and likewise, if you feel comfortable discussing what does an exit look like if one is considered here? Yeah,
and I mean, on the exit side, Brian and I have never been one to like build a company to flip it, right? That's not our MO. We want to build a company that could stand alone and last a long time, and so. That exit looks different. And like to do that, we need to execute really well. And so, we're on, there's opportunities we'll have to evaluate along the way, whether they come from med device or tech or pharma or others, but it's not our predisposition to do that. And think more like IDEX, versus like something else that got sold to someone else is, what we'd be looking for. And then the funding round, we'll need continued financing is what I'll say. And so there's always opportunities there. It's part of Brian and I's jobs as co-founders and executives is to continue to fund keep the company funded and spend a lot of time with investors. So if there's investors that want to talk, feel free we can talk.
Great, thank you for that. I guess maybe I'll keep stealing the floor here, but can you touch on, and if at all relevant, so some of this innovation is occurring from coast to coast, obviously, which is very exciting. But from the local Maine context, what has it been like for you as an entrepreneur, at least as involved as you have been in Maine?
Yeah.
What have resources looked like for you? What has been, if at all, that backbone of collegial support locally or with that Maine lens?
So it's unbelievable. It's been really helpful. We always, when we even started the company here, we're a Maine company that thinks globally, and the Maine resources have been super helpful. Everything from, MTI to Maine Venture Fund to, the seed tax credit to even like our board member who was the former CEO of Putney Vet, et cetera. So like that's been like very supportive. And then I'm only live an hour and a half from Boston. So I'm in Boston all the time because, healthcare mecca for US and maybe the world. And so, I think being here has had a lot of advantages, and we've come with none of the disadvantages that you might imagine from that. And then I think, what was the second part of your question, Garvin?
Just about that, just kind of who or what resources have been kind of that backbone of collegial support for you or MedRhythm?
The other one is that, I don't know, I'm looking at the group that's left. I don't know if you're Maine folks, but the Rue Institute is like super interesting to us. And we're partnered with them. They're a Northeastern school that was funded by a Maine native billionaire who started Silver Lake, that is building a graduate school at the intersection of artificial intelligence and life science. I think they want to graduate, and I probably misquoted them, 5,000 graduate students or 2,000 or 10,000 in that scale in Portland in the next 5 years, who have backgrounds in data science and all of these places. And they've been hiring like crazy. It's great pipelines for talent. If we think about like exactly where we need people, it's in those areas. And so now I like to pretend like it's like the Steve Jobs, like connected dots looking backwards. Like now I like to pretend like we had this great vision that we knew that was going to exist here. We didn't, and it just happened. And it was like, great, there's literally this high-end university building a school in our backyard for the talent that we need. Like that could be a big win for us long term.
Yeah, thank you for that. Northeastern's Rude just doing awesome work in Maine and very exciting. Just pausing here for any questions before we sign off. And again, such a wonderful presentation this afternoon. As maybe folks are just distilling thought, I'll maybe lastly give a little bit of a trite question, but I have to ask, where do you see MedRhythm in say 5 years out or so?
Yeah, we will be serving millions of patients in that point in time, and in various ways, and doing it at the highest level, and ideally continuing to innovate to bring different products and new products in the market beyond our first set of ones. And so, I think we have a real opportunity here. We try to, in the main way, right? We try to not over exaggerate what we could be, but in our minds, like we dream big, and we think that we can make a big impact. And if you don't make big plans, then you don't get people to do unbelievable things. And so that's we got big plans, and we want our team to execute on unbelievable things. And so, millions of patients, improving our products, and we'll have a bunch of employees that will be key to that success.
Awesome. Make no little plans. Love it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I forget who was that, or A. Roosevelt that said that. I forget.
Daniel Burnham.
Burnham. Okay, all right. I'm misquoting. It's
Oh, close enough. That
just
was
give
great.
attribution to anyone I can think of. But yes.
All right. Unless we're seeing anything else, Sabrina, you want to take us away?
Thank you very much. Once again, Owen, thank you so much for an incredible presentation and teaching us about the world of digital health. Really looking forward to your continued growth and seeing all the excitement around, the future of rehabilitation and digital health. So thank you for joining us. For those of you who are interested in seeing other Tech Night presentations, you can visit our YouTube channel, which is located on our website under our Tech Night tab. Next month's Tech Night speaker will be on Thursday, July 8th. We are featuring Blue Trace, formerly known as Oyster Tracker, where Chip Terry, the founder and CEO, will be discussing how Blue Trace is making Harvest reports a breeze. More information on that will be forthcoming, and I thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.